The Hook and Ladder team?
I am. I'm full time.
Okay. And
Matt.
here's Matthew. Matthew looks like he knows what he's doing here. Look at that setup. He's showing off.
This isn't his
Hi.
first rodeo.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
Sorry for being tardy.
No problem. I know you're back to back. So Matt, this is Chris and this is Leyland. I'll do some introductions here. We're on live here. I'm gonna get okay, there's already 60 participants. So let's get into it.
It's awesome. I love the name Leyland. That's one of my brother's middle names, but I've never heard it before besides him and now you.
How's it
So
spelled?
that's really cool. Is it Irish as well too?
Now, how does he spell his middle name?
Just like you do, Leyland.
Oh wow! I saw somebody in a newspaper once with the same name. That's the only one I've ever seen.
It's a great name, but I've never heard it before. You're the first other person I've ever met. So
my mom was listening to a radio program, and she heard the name, and I think she got the spelling wrong. I think that the character's name of the radio program didn't have the Y in the name.
Yeah.
There's a town in Lancashire in England called Leyland.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, let's see. That's it.
All right.
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
No, I honestly, I'm saying nothing. I was just commenting about the drawing behind Leyland as well too, that I like it. It looks super cool. I always look at people's backgrounds. I'm on here, but I don't want to, I'll let you run your rodeo, man. I'm going to shut up and just listen.
All right. Well, it's good to have you guys, and it's good to have everyone who tuned in. I appreciate you taking the time in the middle of a Wednesday here, and everyone's at home. It looks like I came to the office just to make sure everything was in order, because we're going to have a little social distancing staff party on either Friday or early next week. I think the team is very eager to be back in front of each other and to get that fellowship. So thank you again. I'm going to give you a quick little background, a little bit of housekeeping, and then I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists and then jump right into the questions. So Hook and Ladder, it's a marketing agency that I co-founded back in 2010. We basically design, build, and optimize digital funnels. You know, we specialize with social media, digital advertising, content creation, and analytics. And the Calgary Marketing League was just kind of a fun side project that we wanted to launch in an effort to better connect Calgary marketers, both agency side, client side, as well as business owners. The original vision was, of course, to be able to break bread together, have some snacks and some wine, and dig into relevant marketing and business growth topics. And then as soon as we launched the Calgary Marketing League, something else happened. So the goal will be to get back to it being an in-person live event. But while it's virtual, we have the opportunity to bring in folks from outside of Calgary. So in this case, we have Calgary, Vancouver, and Toronto represented. So the webinar is going to go no later than 3:30 Mountain Standard Time. That'll include question and answer, a period. And with that, what I wanted to do was just jump into a quick bio on everybody here. And let me just pull up the link. For the questions, you'll see two sections at the bottom for our attendees. You can either put your questions in the Q&A section, or Tony, my partner, will be in the chat section there. So feel free to put any questions you want in there, and then at the end we'll get into those. So without further ado, I will introduce our speakers. Chris Nealand is the CEO of Cult Collective, The Gathering, and Communo.com. Cult Collective is one of North America's premier engagement marketing firms. His overriding professional passion is helping brands accelerate growth by reimagining how they engage consumers and employees. Chris has experience working in key marketing roles at the world headquarters of John Deere, the Home Depot. He was also formerly the head of retail marketing at RAPP, which is Omnicon's preeminent relationship marketing agency. And then in 2010, Chris co-founded Cult, where he consulted or has consulted with brands like Harley Davidson, Canadian Tire, Marks, Zappos, Best Buy, H-E-B grocery stores, Carter's, Keurig, United Way, and dozens others. And if you've never been to the Gathering, it is probably one of the world's best. It's one of my favorite business brand marketing conferences of all time. It's incredible. So thank you, Chris, for joining us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So next up is Matt Hunt. Matt and I got the opportunity to meet each other in the later stages of 2019, where he came on and helped us navigate some of the opportunities that we saw in front of us. And he's built 3 B2B profitable companies in the last 13 years, agencies specifically, all built on the back of smart marketing and sales. Hundreds of companies, large and small, have hired him to help them implement his unique marketing and sales strategies, and it is quite unique. To name a few, he's worked with Remax, Valvoline, FedEx, Chef's Plate, and many others. His expertise is in SEM, SEO, CRO, PPC, funnel optimization, LinkedIn marketing, and email automation and sales. He's definitely one of my favorite marketers. He's been a shoulder to lean on over the last several months with his perspective and his support. And so, Matthew, thank you again. And then finally, we have Dr. Leyland Pitt. He is very highly decorated. I don't think I have enough time in this webinar to list off all of the credentials: MBA, PhD, Professor of Marketing, EMBA Alumni Chair of the Business, the BD School of Business in Simon Fraser. So my partner, Tony, and I, Dr. Leyland Pitt was one of our professors. He was our marketing professor back in 2010 when we did our MBA together. Hundreds of articles in peer-reviewed journals. It's been accepted. A number of his works have been accepted for publication by such journals as Journal of Advertising Research, Journal of Advertising Information Systems Research, Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science, Sloan Management Review, and Business Horizons, and then California Management Review. So the list goes on and on with these 3. I will get right into it because I'm very excited to dig into a topic today, which is marketing in the new normal that we find ourselves in. And to be honest, before we get into it, there's days where I'm convinced that the landscape has changed entirely and all of the marketing strategies and tactics need to be drastically overhauled. But then there's days where I believe that the new normal, I believe very seriously that the new normal will look a lot like the old normal. And the same fundamentals, the same philosophies, the same marketing strategies should be leveraged without many drastic changes. And so I'm torn, and the clients and the colleagues that I speak to are torn as well. And this is why I thought it would be a great topic to at least address what everyone's talking about, at least address the elephant in the room, and that there will be permanent and drastic changes, and that marketing strategies and tactics ought to follow in suit. So the jury's out. I'm split down the middle, and I know our panel has a lot of good perspective on this. Okay, so before everyone's doing okay, we're good. All right, let's jump into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the question out. We are going to go around the horn, but I'll kick it off by kind of volunteering one of you. So first question: since COVID hit with full force, what brand or company have you seen do a good job in response, and why? Maybe I'll throw this to Matt first, if you don't mind jumping in. And you're muted there, Matt. Oh, there
All right, I'm unmuted. You got me on the spot. So I'm just trying to think of a brand right off the top of my head that's done a really good job, and one's not coming to me right now. But there is a, believe it or not, I can't believe I'm saying this, but there's a politician in Ontario that's actually doing really well with all of this, I think. His name is Mr. Ford there, and and he's handling it actually really, really well. And so if you were to look at like a personal brand, I'm guessing, I don't know for sure, I haven't looked this up, but I'm guessing his ratings are up. And I think he's led from a place of empathy and community and trust building. And I think any brand that focuses on that, you know what's funny, hilarious? Here's the thing. The reality is that's what we should all be focusing on all the time. So here's the best news about what's going on right now. It's actually forcing people to do the right things. And not everybody was doing the right things. You only have one choice. You only have one choice now. which is to do good and right marketing and sales. And so this is immediately solving all those problems. But I'd say that he's doing an excellent job out of whether
That's
it's
great.
intentional or not, he's doing a great job dealing with the situation that's going on.
Awesome. Leyland or Chris, either of you, if you have.
I'll come in. I was also going to use the example of a politician. I didn't vote for our provincial government here in BC, and I've never thought much of them until now. I think the health minister is doing an outstanding job, and we have this remarkable woman called Bonnie Henry, who's the chief medical officer of the province. And she talks to people every day, live on television, in a really sober, encouraging way. She's been nominated for all kinds of awards. People love her. There's a shoe designer here in Vancouver called Fugelsang, I think it's called. I don't buy the shoes, but and he's even designed a pair of shoes for her that sold for charity. So just a really, as Matt said, showing that you really care. I've listed a few brands that I think have been doing well. I mean, love them or hate them, I think Amazon has done an incredible job of serving lots and lots of people really efficiently. Walmart has done the same thing. I think Walmart has done an amazing job of just delivering and showing that it's possible to meet the basic needs of a large number of people. I think Airbnb has done a great job as well. They were under enormous financial pressure, have been really good in issuing refunds, despite many of their properties not wanting to do that. And then finally, I think what we're using as we speak, Zoom, is phenomenal. I hope all of you bought the stock price when this crisis hit, because you'd be a lot better off if you had done so than leaving your money in the market. So I think here are some brands I think have done really well, and we could perhaps learn from them.
I concur with Leyland. I'll throw a good BC company into the mix, which is London Drug. I'll give London Drug credit for 4 little proof points. And they're kind of receiving this award on behalf of the entire category. I think pharmacy in general has done a really nice job, as has grocery. But London Drug was among the first to do senior hours and to have early morning hours dedicated for the most vulnerable amongst us. They did late night hours for first responders and medical professionals, where if you show your credentials, you could get into the store, quote unquote, after it was closed. They have dedicated shelf space for small businesses and local owners. So people that are looking for commerce but have been required to shut their front doors can now put stuff on sale through London Drug, kind of like becoming a bricks and mortar Etsy, if you will. And one thing I learned recently is that the pharmacists have permission to sign a lot of prescriptions now. So if you're unable to get to your doctor for your mental health medication or your rash cream or whatever it was, your pharmacist can make sort of an emergency prescription for you. So they're stepping up and filling a void, because there was a whole lot of people that were on medications that are scared to go to hospitals now. So I think pharmacies and London Drug in particular are doing a really nice job.
So I didn't know that about the pharmacies. That's crazy. But Matt kind of talked about it at the beginning. What principles of marketing stay the same going forward, and are there any are there any new principles that you think are going to come onto the scene in response to not this, but really a changed consumer behavior or a change in consumer behavior? Can you talk about what will stay the same and what might change from a marketing strategy standpoint specifically?
You're asking me first, Caleb?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, things have changed, of course. So all good marketing is always relevant. Okay. And I think probably the easiest thing I find one of the easiest things to anchor these conversations for companies in general is they should just look at something I believe is called the Maslow hierarchy of needs. It's like a triangle. You can Google it. And just basically kind of talks about the state of where people are at. You know, they're either, they're either in a, like, are they worried about their health and shelter and food? Or are they, or are they becoming like their ultimate self at the very top? So obviously things have changed right now where people are worried about their jobs, their, whether they're going to be able to even cover their shelter, possibly food and other things like this. So it'd be really silly not to acknowledge that that's fundamentally changed. Now, I think you have to go back and rejig all your marketing and your conversations to make sure that you're addressing the conversation that people are having, because all good marketing is always entering the conversation that people are having internally in their heads. And those that are able to describe people's problems better than they can describe themselves are going to be able to actually write the right kind of, messaging that they need to do in their marketing. So I think one is acknowledging that it's changed. Two, what has it changed to? And then you need to be able to enter that conversation. If you can do that really well, it's really simple. You just simply kind of put up like I like to draw it on a piece of paper, and I always just like to go fears and frustrations, wants and aspirations. And you just need to look at where people are at today. So, you would say that aspirations and fears are imagined, and wants and frustrations are what's going on currently right now. And I can tell you right now, what's super amplified is where people's imaginations are. And they're super motivated by the pain points. And the pain points are always frustrations and fears. We move away from pain and towards pleasure. And so if you just take a couple of those simple exercises and apply that to whoever your ideal customer or ideal client is, you'll start coming up with the right kind of messaging to pivot for today. But yeah, if you're not pivoting, you're totally missing the boat. I mean, you have to pivot. I mean, things have changed. You can't disacknowledge that the world has not fundamentally changed.
I might counter with, the world has certainly fundamentally changed while we're in quarantine. I think the question is if when things open back up, will there be some hangover effect that will make us a kinder, gentler people? And I don't think the change has been prolonged enough yet to have a World War II-like mentality. You figure the two biggest booms of the Roaring 20s and the sort of the American Dream 50s followed a decade of depression or global conflict. And we've had like a bad 8 weeks, and maybe are going to have a bad 3 months or something like that. So I think some of the permanence will depend on how profound and profuse this is. I think the one thing that I would say, Caleb knows that we've sort of built a business around the 8 principles of a cult brand. And these are principles that go back over 100 years. So they've survived depressions and disease and polio and all this stuff. And only one of the 8 is in jeopardy right now, and that's the principle of congregate. So historically, brands have endeared themselves to their public and have earned loyal followers by finding excuses for people to get together, whether that's at brand music festivals or at flagship stores or at grand openings, or even lining up outside the ritual of getting the first iPhone. And that's now in jeopardy, at least until a vaccine is found. So I think a lot of brands that have benefited from this in real life interaction, think about Harley Davidson and kind of getting together with riders or gathering in Sturgis, if they're not allowed to do that, I know we work with a hockey club that's trying to say, is there a way to fake the congregate principle through a digital fan club or through Zoom or through virtual gaming that somehow scratches the itch that you'd get if you went together to tailgate or to go to a game? And I think that one's a bit in jeopardy. Again, I don't think it's going to be permanent because I don't think we're going to be isolated forever. But if we're isolated for a while, that will show up, I think, in brand affinity scores.
My view is, if we have a discipline like marketing that has principles, those principles should be pretty much permanent. Otherwise, they're not principles. So I think the basics stay the same regardless. Marketing essentially says that we can't be everything to everybody, so we have to be something special to someone in particular. And if we do that well, I think by understanding customers, by understanding how they feel and what they want, things generally work out well. And Most people who've ever taken a marketing course before remember taking notes on marketing strategy and thinking about product and service strategies, pricing strategies, distribution strategies, and how we communicate with our market. I think there are some changes occurring. I think certainly in the way that firms are currently managing and will manage products and services. Certainly new products and new services will evolve as a result of this. I think we'll learn about pricing as things go on. Strangely enough, one would suspect that consumers are going to be much more price conscious at the moment. There's a lot of people without jobs, people with reduced incomes, and yet some of the evidence that's coming in and so far suggests that the opposite is happening. People are more generous. There are websites that have been set up so that people can tip service workers that even haven't provided service for them. People like DoorDash and Skip the Dishes will tell you that the average tip given to servers now has increased over this time, which tells me that people are not that sensitive to price yet. That might change. Something that's disappointed me is the way in which many firms have communicated with their markets. I don't know about you, but if I hear this term again, we're all in this together, or if I hear we are living in unprecedented times, or these are, I'm going to get ill if I have to listen to these things much more. And I think a lot of the advertising that we're seeing at the moment is really cliched. It's dull, it's boring, it's not inspiring, and it's not doing any good. And then the final thing that I think has to me been a real revelation is, in terms of distribution strategy, has been the nature of our supply chains. On the one hand, our local supply chains, I think, have been phenomenally robust. We probably all remember just 2 months ago when there was the rush on toilet paper and everybody was thinking, well, we're going to be able to get toilet. Well, it was just complete stupid herd mentality that was occurring. Those supply chains are so robust. Your average supermarket has more than enough in supply. And if they don't have it, they have a warehouse somewhere nearby in the city that has it. And if they don't have it, there's a big distribution station somewhere, and then back at the manufacturer, there's more stock. These supply chains have been incredibly robust. We're not going to run out of food. We're not going to run out of the stuff for our homes. So to me, that's been really reassuring. The last thing on earth you want is when these things start to fail, and they haven't. On the other hand, I think global supply chains are really under threat at the moment. I think there are a lot of people in government and in large businesses who are really sorry that they've outsourced manufacturing to some other country somewhere else that is no longer reliable, and that we can't depend on the quality or the supplies that we need. So global supply chains, I think, are under a lot of threat.
That was excellent, guys. One thing that was mentioned earlier about pricing, actually, Chris Nealand, a long time ago, and I don't know if this document or presentation still exists, but created a presentation on the concept of pricing. If there's any professional service folks in the audience, I don't know, Chris, if that thing can ever reemerge one day, but it would be something that
backed by popular demand.
Yeah, you can buy it, and we'll figure that out. Okay, so what are your thoughts, guys, on how a local regional business can not survive but thrive right now, versus how can a national or international brand thrive? So we're looking for not survive but thrive, both on a local and national or international level.
Let me take that one first, just because when you sent these questions over, that was my soapbox question. I'm absolutely infuriated with the way both the U.S. and Canadian governments are dealing with stimulus. I jokingly, only half jokingly, refer to them as the Amazon and Walmart stimulus packages, because we've got federal governments issuing stimulus checks to everybody to encourage them to shop, and then have mandated the closure of every store except for Amazon and Walmart, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. Those are the two brands that need it the least. and that, you know, this idea that they're selling essential services is bullcrap. You can get you know, boogie boards and board games at either of those. I'm not going into my Walmart to get my toilet paper and bananas. I'm getting stuff to keep my kids entertained, which I consider an essential service at the Nealand household, but not something that any store, and I think frankly small business owners could have been far more creative at finding ways to ensure their shoppers are safe, as opposed to the curbside pickup and some of the more bureaucratic things that are happening inside the big box chains. So I'm actually very worried for the small business owner, not because of their ingenuity or relevance, but because of the government's myopic focus of keeping them out of business right now, as opposed to allowing them the agency to determine what is required for the health and safety of their staff and for their customer base. So until we get more vocal, and I think the Americans just by nature are more accustomed to pushing back on their political leaders than the Canadians are, we're just way too accommodating. We're sheep following the leaders saying, oh, you don't want us to go? That's okay. And, you know, I don't think we have to pull Elon Musk's and go apeshit on everybody and threaten to pull our factories out of, you know, the state if the government doesn't let us open. But to shutter everything for 4 to 6 weeks while we figure out what we're dealing with was difficult, but not reckless. Keeping us closed for the next 1 to 3 months while you selectively get to decide who's open for business and who isn't open for business, and that's largely based on the national footprint that these retailers have or these restaurants have, et cetera, I think is going to result in lawsuits and is a major encroachment on our free enterprise and even the principles of a capitalistic society. So I think that the big guys are going to continue to get rich, and I think that the little guys are going to be disproportionately disadvantaged, not because of the pandemic, but because of the government intermediation. Thank you. Nealand out.
I love it. And now with 40% of our participants now gone, we'll give it over to you. I'm just kidding. Matt or Leyland?
Go, Matt.
Sure. So, so I think, you know, the question was that you initially asked was what was the?
Yeah, it was, you know, what are your thoughts on how local businesses can thrive right now versus how does that differ from how national or international brands would thrive? So the paradox between the sizes there.
Yeah, well, so I think that, you know, what was already said was true. There are some things that are just against some businesses, period. And I think that, you know, the reality is there's going to be red zone businesses and sort of amber, yellow zone businesses and green businesses. I mean, there'll be some that thrive environments like this and they'll go back to being yellow when it's over. And others will be yellow and go to green, and some in red are just not going to recover whatsoever. You know, there are some things that you just cannot control. I mean, look, there's sites like, you know, there's a local escape, you know, when you take your kids to an escape room kind of game thing locally here in Toronto, and they're pretty smart. You know, people couldn't come to it anymore. And so they created a mobile escape program where they literally like mailed you a letter at home that people subscribe to keep the kids busy, which was pretty innovative. Like there's always a way to kind of pivot and use creativity, get yourself out of it. But the reality is, will this really like actually save the business? We don't know. You may need to change completely the model that you're in if you're an entirely red zone business. The way I like to look at it is I think history does repeat itself. I do think that there's nothing like this that's really happened before in this capacity. However, there have been crises, there have been recessions, there have been depressions. And if we can look at things at a macro level, you can kind of understand where you need to go. I always like to use an analogy of like Wayne Gretzky. You know, his father taught him how to be a great hockey player by teaching him how to skate to where the puck is going, not where the puck is. And so like anything, there's these concepts or principles that's called like pression and lag. And it's just the easiest way to understand it is if you throw a rock into like water and it goes plop, and then you kind of have this ripple effect that goes out. That's the lag. The pressure was the thing that came down. Well, you can like look at it this way, like what's going to happen next at a macro level and will affect businesses at a macro level and businesses at a micro level. And so we had like COVID that triggered off like obviously like unemployment, right? And then that triggered off stimulus. And then the stimulus is probably, probably not going to work, which is going to eventually lead to more unemployment and defaults or insolvencies. And you kind of have to figure out like where is this going? And that's going to obviously affect on how people are thinking and feel about things and the things that are important to people at the time, right? Like, and if we can look at things at that level, and I like to look at things at a level at a 10,000 foot view and then drill into a micro level, we can then kind of figure out what is it that we need to do for our macro businesses, our international businesses, as well as our little tiny small local business. And so that's what I would suggest that people need to do first, is figure out where that puck is going for you. And everybody's got a different idea. Some people think it's a V-shaped recovery. Some people think it's going to be U-shape, L-shape, the W, but you got to figure out what is going on here and how it impacts you, both, politics-wise, economy-wise, and even what people are going to want and need at that time and in the future. And I think if you do that, you might be able to put yourself in a position that you can survive and possibly thrive.
Matt, can you, just before we pass it to Leland, can you remind us or remind me what was the site to subscribe to if you're interested in more of the macro conversation?
Yeah, so I say you start with the free YouTube channel to begin with to see that you like it, but there's a channel called Real Vision Television, I believe, and basically it's the world's best economists on there being interviewed. It's very, very good, and they also have a membership that's very affordable, where it's $200 a year, I believe, and you get stuff early, or you get some interviews that nobody else sees. And have found that extremely helpful in helping me find more clarity in the thinking of where things are going. Because I think if you understand things at a macro level, you can then figure out what's going to happen at a micro level. But it's very hard to do it the other way around. So it's useful.
Thanks. Thank you.
I think if you look at every major crisis that humanity has faced, and these include wars, they include major financial crises like the Great Depression and the Great Recession, and of course, pandemics such as this one. As horrible as they almost always result in innovations. So, innovations that you and I take for granted today, like the microwave oven and GPS technology, all came about as a result of weapons development during the Second World War. If you look at the innovations that resulted from the crash of 2008, things like Kickstarter and GoFundMe and Indiegogo wouldn't be around had it not been for those. So these, the one thing that we do know about major crises that face humanity is they almost always lead to innovation. So I'm not sure that there's massive differences in the ways in which small local firms will approach this and large multinationals. I think the successful ones will be the ones who innovate. I mean, we're already starting to see that, I think, at a very small, seemingly insignificant level with the way local restaurants, some of the good ones, or the efficient ones, are adapting to feeding people in their homes and doing a reasonable business out of it. A great example that I've been working with, talking about in the last week or two is a business like a physical therapist or a physiotherapist. If you think about it, there's probably not a more physical business in the world, apart from having your hair cut, than a physical therapist. You need to be able to see them in their rooms. They need to work on you with their hands, their equipment, their ultrasound, and so forth. And so when this happens, you start to say, well, these people will close up. They won't be able to pay their rent, and they won't be able to pay their staff. Some of the really good ones have realized that it is just as efficient and just as effective to deliver physiotherapy, and found that in many cases, patients actually benefit more from it and appreciate it more. They get to talk and spend more time. There's no distractions. There's no need to drive to your appointment or to wait in a waiting room. It's in the comfort of your own home, and they feel they get far more personal attention and can do exercises that would make up for the physical touch that they're not getting. So it can be done anywhere. And one last example is in my own field, which is education. Most universities sort of had a half-hearted attempt at online education. I think in most cases without great success. I'm not a huge fan of teaching online, but in March I was forced to, and I hate to admit it, but it really works well. I still prefer being in a real classroom, and I know that most students prefer being in a real classroom, but my goodness, this works. My great fear is that when and if this is over, universities are going to be saying, all right, let's go back to the normal that we used to do. And that, I think that is really silly, and it's wasting what's a big opportunity. If they were truly innovative, and sadly most of them are not, they would be designing whole new degree programs that could be delivered online. And instead of worrying about whether all your overseas students are going to make it for the fall semester, because that's where most of your funding comes from, instead of worrying about that, you could be providing education to the world. That, believe me, this is not going to happen. So I'm thinking wishfully here.
Yeah, Leila, I agree with you. I think there was a study, that looked at all the companies that actually made it like 100+ years, and I don't think there was one that ended up doing what they started out being, right? So the reality is you must innovate to survive if you want to make it a long time. And I also think that it's really interesting that these crises sometimes really challenge people's limiting beliefs, which is basically what you're kind of talking about, and that's the real blocker at the end of the day. I mean, this lesson just comes up for me personally over and over and over again. Very rarely do we have business problems, but we have mindset problems that show up in our business. And that's basically, what you're communicating is that we have these just limiting beliefs that's preventing us from this innovation. And if we can fix the mindset, then we can solve a lot of these problems. It's really interesting.
When it comes to innovation, guys, this wasn't on your list of questions, so sorry to blindside you, but on when it comes to innovation, whether you're local, small, or big national company, is there a checklist or some things to think about so that you avoid being like the innovation tactic falling flat or being labeled opportunistic or just not working versus something that is lasting and really woven into the fibers of humanity and will work? Is there anything, one or two things that you would think about if you're a company? Hey, people are telling me to innovate. What do I avoid when it comes to putting pen to paper on ideating that? Or do you just throw it out there and see what the market data tells you?
I think a lot of innovation comes because you're forced to. I think very little innovation, as far as I know, comes from people saying, well, here's a checklist on how to innovate. I know, lots of business schools teach courses on innovation and managing technology. I've seen very few successes that come from, here's a checklist, and if you tick all these boxes, you will be innovative. I think most innovation happens when people are desperate. And there's so many organizations that have been forced into being desperate as we sit here. And I think the ones that say, if we don't do something, we're not going to be here next year. What can we do? I think that's when innovation starts to happen. I mean, will universities be here next year? I'm guessing they will. I hope they will. But if we go back to doing what we used to do, I think we've lost out on a huge opportunity to do something innovative. And we're in a sense forced into a little laboratory where we can do some experiments at the moment, some of which will work and some of which won't. But if we use that laboratory and we use that time, I think there can be some great innovations that come about as a result of it.
Yeah, I would advise people to think of innovation beyond the context of product innovation. So often we think about innovation as how do we digitize something? How do we make something more tech-centric? And look at the innovation of just enabling an efficient and productive remote workforce. So now you may not sell as much, but your cost model can be drastically reduced because you don't have 100,000 feet of office space, or you're relying more on contingent workers than on full-time staff. So there's innovation just in how you operate. There's innovation in your culture and how are decisions made. And I like what Leyland's saying is, we can use COVID as the excuse for failed experiments, but maybe it makes our leadership team more courageous. I know many clients pre-COVID that were dabbling in alternative revenue streams or alternative offerings, that now's the chance to dominate in those areas. Stop dabbling and keeping things around because of all these legacy, reasons. You can be a lot more blunt and a lot more bold in your decision making. And I think that would be innovative in regards to how you guys operate as a leadership team. So, I subscribe to the adage, never let a good crisis go to waste. And we're letting it go to waste if we're just hunkered down waiting for normal to get back here. Let's use it to trim the fat and to become the businesses that we always wished that we could be, but didn't have the guts to do, because now we have a lot less to risk.
Right. When it comes to, because we're talking a lot about things that are fundamentals and foundational and they won't change, or they need to be relied on going forward. But in the spirit of change, from a consumer behavior standpoint or from a consumer DNA makeup standpoint, let's try to dig a little bit. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on what are some changes that for sure will, like consumer behavior and the DNA makeup of a consumer will forever be changed because of this. I mean, we've only had experience to like, I wasn't here for the Second World War and didn't go through that, or the Great Depression, but what is something that will never change, or that will change and never come back to the way it was as it relates to consumer behavior and the makeup of us? Or is there anything?
We don't know, man. Like, honestly, we don't know right now. I mean, like I was mentioning before, there is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs that exists. And I think that that's a sliding scale that moves up and down depending on where people are. But if this ends up being something that leads us into, like if this permeates for a long period of time and we end up in this sort of like semi-lockdown or continuous lockdown for 18 months while they try and find a virus, or longer, those will be scars that last a long time. If this leads us into a depression that's, many years, not just a 24, 36 month recession, those will be scars that last a long time. This will be one of those, generational things that happen. So people will, like, I remember stories from my grandparents who, would have been just after the Depression, sort of growing up in their teens and 20s, and their thinking is different. And it even affected my parents, who were baby boomers, their thinking. And so it will change things if it's bad, but we don't know, but it'll fundamentally change the way we behave and act and buy and move forward, hopefully for the better, like Leland and Chris were talking about. Hopefully people find the courage to innovate and change, but it will be different. So I think that we have to respect that when those things happen, and acknowledge it and behave appropriately to what's going on.
To me, the single biggest change that's happened for most of us in the past 3-4 months is that we realize we can live at home and work from home. And I think for many of us as consumers, we're going to say there really is no need to go into the office to do any work. I can work as well from home. I can work as efficiently, perhaps sometimes more efficiently from home. I don't have the distractions at home that I might have. I don't have small kids, so I can say that easily, but we don't have the distractions that we have maybe going into the office. And if that becomes, and I can't see any reason certainly in developed countries like this, that it doesn't become a reality for a great majority of people, that means we don't need to go to an office to do work anymore. And I think that will have a major impact on the way we purchase and consume goods and services. I don't think it bodes well for retail. because I think as a result of it, a lot of us have realized that we can shop quite easily and quite conveniently from home. So it doesn't bode well for retail. I would hate to own a shopping mall at the moment. I don't think that's going to be a business you want to be in. And I think in larger terms, real estate, as we've understood it for most of our lives, is going to be very different. So, what's going to happen to all these offices where people used to work and they don't need to work in those offices anymore? So those are certainly change. The only other thing that I thought, I hope is going to be a more permanent change in our behavior as consumers, is that we will continue being more tolerant, more patient, and more kind, not just to each other, but to the people that we work with and the people whose businesses and organizations we support. And I think that's happening, and I really do hope it stays. I think it's a wonderful side effect of this catastrophe that's befallen us.
Yeah, I'll weigh in. I agree with Leyland's point about the remote workforce. I think white collar employees have been pleasantly surprised. White collar employers have been pleasantly surprised that white collar employees have been as productive as they have been, despite going into the office to be under the watchful eye of their supervisors. But that has a huge ripple effect. If you start to think about, the other thing that's happened in the past 8 to 10 weeks is we've all become glaringly self-aware about the deficiencies of our home. We're staring at this place that we've been stuck in. So I think there's going to be a new wish list of what we would like from our homes, and a new willingness to say, I'm going to go get that, because what used to be the driver was our commute, and how close do I need to live, or whether it's to the office or to my social life. And if that now changes, I think you will see a burst out into the suburbs. I think some people are going to downsize because they realize they built monstrosities they didn't need. A lot of people who thought it was quaint to live in an 800 square foot apartment are going to realize I need more space or a home office. So I think the real estate business, while the commercial real estate business will suffer, a lot of that commercial space will be converted into residential space, and you'll see a bigger sprawl as we get more into nature and we start to realize, when push comes to shove, what's important is our relationships, our health, our connection to the outdoors. I talk with a lot of people that are in New York, and it's not like they even had the luxury of escaping to the woods when they weren't quarantined, right? It was basically Central Park. And so a lot of people are thinking, well, if I don't have to be in New York anymore, I'm going to get 2 hours of my day back by not commuting in and out of the city. And I'm going to go to some place that I can enjoy a different quality of life.
Well, Leyland, I would disagree with something you said. My wife very much tells me that I need to go back to work and go back to the office. But other than that, I think I'm bugging her a little bit. But
you see, there's probably going to be a massive growth in divorce lawyers and marriage after this.
Yeah.
Matt and I had a long talk about that. Yeah. Green zone industries, right, Matt?
Yeah, there's definitely some green zone industries that are gonna boom for sure. Unfortunately, they're not the ones that everyone is excited about. So it'll, check cashing and bankruptcy lawyers, employment lawyers, and divorce, all the stuff that nobody wants to really wants to think about. But that's the reality of probably what is most likely coming. Not to live on the negative side. I'm very optimistic, but the reality is, guys, you can't shut down the world economy for 60 days and expect it to go back to normal. Like, you just I think it's absolutely foolish to think that things are not going to change. And I think the little things that we like, that we're talking about, that are fun things right now, but the like, hey, we're going to spend more time, maybe we're going to move out of the city centers, because we don't need to go to work anymore, and all of these other things. I don't think those things will be a proactive thing that we approach. I think most things, like anything in life, will be reactive to whatever the macro situation is going on. I don't think people are going to move out of the city because they're like, hey, I don't need to go to the office anymore. I think they're going to move out of the city because they lost their job and they don't have any more money and no other choice but to move personally. So I'm just looking at the history of how people usually behave. But I think I think both things together will happen. There's going to be some pretty big big changes. I think it's happening already internally. It's funny. I have a friend in Toronto, RBC Bank. They already had a plan before pre-COVID to reduce their office space by 25%. And now it's on track to be well over 50% already. Like they have no intention of sending people back to the office normally.
Yeah. And Bank of Montreal, you saw that in the news.
That's just one company. Like, and the ripple effect is just huge. Like, what about all those commercial places? And what about all those malls and restaurants below those commercial? Like, I don't know if you've been to Toronto, but there's a full underground place that's not even like running. I mean, it's going to get interesting.
Mm-hmm. Chris, something you mentioned there with, looking at your house, you're sitting there and you're looking around, I got to fix that. I think there's a Home Depot campaign coming out of this. So if you want to go half and half on it, we'll figure it out.
Deal.
So this is my last question, because there's a lot of really, really good questions coming in. And that is that, I mean, like you guys, I love marketing, but I also believe that as marketers, we have a responsibility in this big conversation and a big role to play. So my question to you guys is how do we fulfill that role? And whether we're in-house or agency side, how do we make the industry better through our craft, and how do we make the world better with marketing?
I'll go first, I guess. My answer today would be the same as it was pre-COVID. I think there are two fundamental flaws with marketing today that must be corrected, and perhaps this is a great excuse to get us to think differently about that. The first is that marketing does not equal communications or advertising. Way too many marketing departments are filled with communicators. I jokingly refer to them as markdowners instead of marketers. They're just in the administration of stuff. Sales, offers, new spring lineup, new fall clearance. Marketing should be about the creation of value, and we should reclaim some credibility in the C-suite and within our organizations that marketing can do more than just make pretty pictures or clever copy. We can understand insights, and we can demonstrate value and produce products, offerings, services, experiences that people actually care about. And then the second thing is that marketing has been inappropriately fixated mostly on prospects, sometimes on customers, and almost never on staff or on employees. And I think of them as a three-legged, equal-weighted stool. And marketing should be partnering with their HR peers right now to understand how to either win back talent. I mean, think about 35, 40 million displaced professionals are in the marketplace right now. How do you have a brand that the best talent in the world wants to work for? How is the marketing team using its creative problem solving and its creative abilities and its digital tools to galvanize the new culture of people who either have survivor's guilt or anxiety, or have been put in roles that they now don't know how to do because they got promoted because they were the last person standing because the department got let go. So there's just a lot of people issues, and people are the brand. And that's not just frontline associates, salespeople, call centers. Everybody that works in that company is a consumer and an opportunity to become a cult-like advocate of the brand. And that's not HR's job. That's the marketing team's job.
Yeah, I would certainly echo what Chris has just been saying. I would also add that I think how can marketing be responsible, hopefully when this crisis comes to some kind of an end. And I would say don't be opportunistic, because it's going to be really tempting to be opportunistic and to say, all right, how do we grab back as much of possible of what we've lost in as short a time as possible. And so I think there's going to be a big temptation to try and claw back. And I think it's marketing's responsibility to make sure that firms don't do that. I was astounded. I'm not sure if it was fake news or whether it's really, I was astounded to see that the cruise line companies have sold something like 600% more cruises in the past week or two than they did this time last year. Now, you know, for someone who thinks that they're going on a cruise would be like, you know, taking a journey on a floating Petri dish, why would people be doing it? And there's a simple reason. And the cruise companies, I think many of them have seen that this is a great way to generate lots of cash at the moment by saying there's no holds barred here. We will refund the money if you don't take your cruise. You can cancel it any time. And so a lot of people have said, well, there's nothing to lose here. These cruises are going for a song. They're cheap. Let's book, and we'll be able to go next year when everything's okay. I'm just worried that when that time comes to reclaim your money because you didn't go on the cruise, that you're going to have to jump through all kinds of hoops, because some marketing people somewhere have been opportunistic and said, here's a great way to generate lots of cash, because what we need now is cash, and we'll take the consequences later. I think you're going to see the same thing with the airlines. I'm sure if you're like me, you've got a promise from an airline that you still have a valid ticket. It's just that your flight didn't go when they said it would, but you're able to get this ticket within the next 2 years. You know, how are you going to fight an airline where thousands of other people are also trying to get their tickets back? So I'm just worried that some companies will be opportunistic, and I think, you know, marketing's responsibility is not to gouge customers when these things get tough.
Matt, I'm gonna jump into questions here, and just in the sake of time. But Tony, if you want to unmute yourself, I know you've been collecting some questions from the group, and maybe for these two, we don't necessarily have to go around the horn. But if you feel like you got a great answer or something you want to talk about, just jump on in.
Yeah, totally. First of all, great conversations here. I'm hearing a lot of good feedback from the chat room. I'm also seeing some really humorous conversation actually on that front as well. So I did capture a number of questions. So one, like Caleb said, feel free to jump in to answer if you have a view on that. So the first question I got was that there's a lot of references about, you know, when we had the first questions about what are some of the really good examples in terms of marketing since COVID hits, there's a lot of good references in terms of, you know, politicians and consumer facing brands. So there's a specific questions from Jennifer about, have anyone seen some really good examples of marketing for non-consumer facing companies?
Well, again, I would argue, you know, if what you're asking for are there really good examples of TV commercials that non-consumer companies have been doing, that would be different than really good examples of marketing. I know, for example, for us as a professional services firm that buys a lot of services, accounting, tax preparation, tech software, all of my account managers have been calling me, asking me how my business is doing, how we're handling the crisis, what we can do, what they can do to help. I mean, that's super high touch, empathetic, and sometimes it's just offering a shoulder to cry on, and sometimes it's offering me a rental deferral, or it's offering me something other, you know, something more tangible or financial. So I think that at the end of the day, all business is personal, and if you're in a B2B space, you need to lean into the relationship side of the business and maybe get creative. Going back to Leyland's point about innovation, is there something innovative you do with payment terms? Is there something innovative you do with deferred service delivery so you can help your clients stay afloat? I remember I used to work at John Deere right out of grad school. I wanted to work for the best, biggest brand I could get my hands on. And John Deere just been voted one of the top 10 most iconic brands of the 20th century. And I was walking around trying to understand, how did this brand become so iconic? And they were an innovative product company until the Great Depression. And in the Great Depression, they become a finance company that allowed farmers to keep the equipment because they could, even though they couldn't pay for it. Because John Deere's opinion was, this is either the end of times and I don't need the equipment back, or things are going to get better and I'm going to need these farmers to be loyal to me post-depression. So they let them use the equipment for free, and a whole new business called John Deere Credit was birthed. And to this day, people will talk about the day that John Deere saved the family farm from grandpa or grandma. And so that sort of loyalty was birthed out of crisis. And if you're in the B2B space, how can you make somebody irresistibly loyal to you because of how you treated them when they were in a ditch?
Yeah. So Chris, this is what I always talk about is trust, equity, and community. So everybody wants more sales, more leads, more prospects. It doesn't matter, B2C, B2B, but it's actually the wrong focus. And you just like nailed my point that I talk about all the time with people, which is people make buying decisions based on the trust that they have with you and your brand and who you are. And that's really what you need to be chasing after, is how do you expand your community and how do you bank more trust equity with them? You know, and when you do something like that, you can buy generations of trust and they'll buy from you forever. And I'm assuming that's probably very close to, I don't know your cult formula, but I'm guessing that's kind of like baked into it as well too. But that's exactly what people, this is what I said about the beginning of the webinar was I said, look, what I love about these crises is it forces people to do the right things, which is really, that's what good marketing is at the end of the day. That is what are the right things to be doing. You should be doing that all the time, not just in a crisis or when you're in a pinch. It's like, do that all the time. And if you do that, you literally can develop, a money printing machine whenever you want. And if you pay attention to all the brands and the companies and the people and the influencers who are doing well and who are going to survive this shit storm, you're going to find out that the ones that did it was because they had the most community with the most trust equity. They made deposit after deposit after deposit after deposit. And every once in a while, they make a little withdrawal and they're always going to get whatever they want on that withdrawal. And that's what you focus on, whether it's a local business or a big brand. It'd be the same thing.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris and Matt. The second question was from Maria, who works in the hotel industry. And her question is about, first of all, if there's some general advice that you would give to industries that got hit really hard as part of COVID. And also part of her questions was if there's any good data source on basically gauging people's willingness to spend and what they would be willing to do now to kind of be, I guess, ahead of everyone else kind of thing.
There's a bunch of studies online right now. I say check out Real Vision television if you want macro information of where people are and where they're spending their dollars. There's also, I can give to you guys afterwards, I've been collecting a ton of graphs about this, but also Yelp has a great study on all the different categories. There's also like a lot of marketing companies, like agencies have a lot of inside information based on analytics as well too, to see where people are spending their dollars. But there's a lot of information out there right now of where people are spending and possibly as well too, you can look at the future of where those spending dollars might go.
Yeah, in terms of the first half of the question, hotels are in what I just, shameless plug for a piece of content I just posted on my LinkedIn, a video series talking about this 4 quadrants of business. And hotels are in this quadrant called recoup, where there's very little hotels could or should be doing right now because, again, they're not allowed to be open. But when it is opened, they should. The X factor here, I guess, is the impact of the unemployment rate. How quickly will jobs come back? Because if families are really suffering from prolonged unemployment, those family vacations become discretionary expenses that get cut quickly. But let's assume that most of the jobs are temporarily furloughed because the government shut us down, not because there was some systemic problem with commerce. Hotels are not only going to get all the family trips that were planned for Q3, Q4, or for 2021, they're going to get the pent up demand of people that are either looking for another 4 set of walls to stare at or postponed the spring break vacation or the graduation trip. So what they need to be working on right now is maximizing peak capacity. Is there something more innovative that they can do that will allow more beds and heads, turning rooms faster, acquiring distressed assets from competitive properties, making sure that when the economy goes open, like we work with a mall client in Manitoba, that they were told on Thursday that the mall would reopen on Monday. Well, nobody in the food court, for example, had time now to bring back all of the employees that they let go in 4 days. So how do you create a system of preparation that will allow that when the government says you can now go back to staying the night in a hotel, you're at peak capacity on day 2 rather than taking you weeks or God forbid months to get ramped back up. All of the cleaning procedures, all of the check-in procedures, all of that kind of stuff needs to be really refined right now in this quiet before the storm. Because I do imagine that the hotel industry will rebound far faster than, say, the airline industry will. But if the cruise industry is any indicator, people are chomping at the bit to get away right now.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. We've got the next question from Marin, which is also industry specific, but there are comments that Leland has talked about with regards to real estate, where we may be anticipating a lower demand as a result of people working from home, and Chris also talked about, hey, potentially some of the commercial space may be repurposed. So Marin's question was about on the topic of transformation industry as a result of innovation. What are your thoughts in terms of how real estate and marketing real estate will be changed, given that the industry has traditionally been fairly physical in nature?
I guess I would start off by saying everyone needs somewhere to live. It just might not be the same place that you're living at the moment. Everyone who is working needs somewhere to work. It might just not be the same place that you're working from or at the moment. If we do see this trend toward this, and if it happens, it's going to be a pretty massive trend to white collar workers working from home. There's going to be a lot of downtown business office space going empty. The example of TD that Matt gave in Toronto. Someone's going to have to buy that, and someone's going to have to sell it. So I guess it will require the real estate business to shift their focus pretty quickly to understand how that market is going to change, what that market's going to want, because somebody will want that space. There's no doubt about it. It might not be at the same rent that it's currently earning, but somebody's going to want that space for something. It might be for living in, it might be for perhaps establishing some kind of small businesses in, or something like that. Somebody's going to have to want to buy and sell that space. That's how I see it, and I would simply see it as a refocusing of the way you manage the real estate business.
Sure. No, even I guess from our end, because we work with a number of real estate developers, we're seeing a lot of our clients, they're repurposing their marketing budget to be a lot more virtual in nature, virtual tour, expecting less people to be on site, kind of thing. So certainly we're seeing players in that industries not stopping. But this lines up to the next question.
Tony, let me just weigh in on that one last point. I mean, I think residential real estate buying remains one of those industries that has been ripe for disruption for the past 50 years. I mean, the MLS was really the most innovative thing to that industry in the past 20 years. So I do think what this is, my sister's a real estate agent in Philadelphia, and it has caused her to rethink virtual showings, the true value of what I'm doing versus the commission that I'm charging on the home. So I think the pricing models are being reimagined, and how the transactions are bought. And so I think a real estate is ripe for disruption the way TurboTax disrupted accounting services. I don't have to sit across the desk with an accountant for 3 hours and pay $2,500. I can get a piece of software that can ask me simple questions. I can get it done for $50 in an evening, kind of a thing. So this is not a time where I think being a real estate agent would be a particularly good career choice, because people are going to say, I don't need to meet with you, and how much value are you really bringing to this equation compared to what online tools are able to do now?
Well, and if it's, I think you said it was a Marin asking the question. If it's the Marin, I think it is. They're doing exactly that with Bode Canada, right? It's really eliminating the real estate agent from the equation of the buyer and the seller. Which good question, Marin.
Thank you. Next question I have here is from Jessica. The question was, how do you think recency bias will play a factor into the changes and innovation that will stem from this once there's a vaccine, will things get back to normal? I know there's already a conversation about how there will be some behavioral change as a result that's permanent. But is there any of our panelists who has any additional comment with regards to kind of the recency bias and some of the kind of short-term behavioral component of that?
Well, I mean, I think the recency bias is huge. And, I think anybody that's been through a traumatic experience can sometimes be amazed at how quickly certain aspects of life return back to normal and how people have PTSD and some issues linger for a long, long time. Like I said, I think the one thing would be COVID is a tale of two cities. There is the upper middle class, top 5%ers who this is wildly inconvenient for. And then there's the bottom 50%ers who have 4 kids at home and no Wi-Fi and no computer, and they're going to the public library to try to get their grades done. And they're both parents who are working 3 jobs are now 100% dependent on government assistance. So it's not fair to, with a broad stroke, try to pretend that which demographic is going to get out of this the fastest, because there are many people. There'll be, I mean, the latest projection this morning, there'll be 137,000 people who are dealing with the loss of a loved one. I mean, that grieving can take months or years just in and of itself, much less all the things that we're talking about related to commerce and capitalism. So the recency effect will be, I think, directly proportional to how displaced we were over the past couple of months. And what I hope we'll learn is some of the macro things around what's the next future pandemic response going to be. I'm really looking forward to the Harvard Business Review 24 months from now that looks back at what happened and gives us the grade on what was an overreaction, what was the underreaction, so that we can really start to decide, was this a great dry run for the next bioterrorist threat or the next pandemic or the next drought or the next crises that we have to face? Will we be better prepared for it? Because this one seemed to have caught us off guard.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Chris. Next question from Allison. What would you say to businesses that are hesitant to devote any money budget to marketing right now?
Here, I'll take that one. So here's the reality. Money must flow. I know we talked about, if you can sell, okay? If you can make money. Yes, we don't want to take advantage of people at this time. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to be opportunistic, but money must flow. If we don't have money that's flowing, period, we have bigger problems. Once liquidity locks up, like, we're all screwed. So our job and duty is to get everyone moving and buying and doing things as soon as possible. If everyone sits there fearful and doesn't do anything, it's going to cause even bigger problems right now. So this is really, really, really important that people buy things and commerce and don't hoard or stop spending money. But the reality is, like, some of this stuff is going to lock up. So we have to think about, how do people spend that money today to get them to spend it in different ways. And so different things will become important to different people. An example would be, if you are in business and you need to save money, then people are going to look to either remove people altogether, if that's a big labor cost, to automation, right? Or in some sort of technology, or they're going to be looking for things that are simpler done. They're not going to look for everything to be so custom. It'll be more like a package, or this is done now and something that's done very quickly. So you have to think about, just like, what is it, that thing that everybody needs right now at that time, that's sort of just in time product for that situation. And so create that and innovate that and give people that now, so that we can keep commerce going as much as possible.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. So the last question that I have here, which wraps up the Q&A, is actually very much related to what you talked about, Matt, which is about, identifying the needs, which is actually related to the question that Caleb was asking about, right? We were having the conversation about innovation, but innovation is driven by needs. So a question from Robin is that he's curious on the thoughts on way to help uncover and define those new emerging needs. If anyone has any idea on that.
Let me have a go at that. One of the things I think we make a mistake at as marketers is we believe that all innovation should be customer driven. In other words, find out what the customer wants and give it to them, and you'll be okay. That's only about half of the equation. Certainly, there's a lot of good evidence of great innovations that have come about as a result of finding out what customers want and giving it to them. But there's a lot of companies that I think we all admire and people that we all admire who have succeeded by ignoring customers and realizing that if you have a really great innovation, there will be customers for it, even though they didn't even know they needed this innovation. Some of my favorites are Steve Jobs Steve Jobs always said, you never ask customers what they want because they don't know what's possible. And if you invent really great products, there will be customers for them. Probably the best example from Apple was the iPod Touch. You may remember the iPod Touch was launched about a year after the first iPhone. And what was the iPod Touch? It was an iPod, or it was an iPhone that couldn't phone. You couldn't make a phone call on it. It had everything else, including apps and mail and Wi-Fi and you name it, it had that. And he said, we launched this product without knowing what customers would use it for. And as it turned out, what they used it for was as a games device. They played games on it and then realized that they could buy the games off the App Store. The App Store didn't come about as a result of the iPhone. The App Store came out as a result of the iPod Touch. And all those things that you could do on the iPod Touch, customers discovered that. It wasn't that Apple went out and said, "Do you want to have a personal game device?" Another great example is Cirque du Soleil. Guy Laliberté, who was the marketing VP of Cirque, he always said, "You'd never ever do customer research and ask people what they want." He said, because if you ask them what they wanted in a circus, they'd tell you they wanted a couple of elephants and a mangy old lion or two and a clown with a red nose and some acrobats. And when you give them that, that's not what they want. He said, customers do not know what's possible. Our focus is on our performers because if we create an environment for them. So I think that's, a long answer to the question is, don't solely focus on innovation by asking or trying to find out what customers want. Sometimes it's about imagination. It's about having great ideas. It's about being desperate. And I think these are desperate times. And a lot of people will find that by being desperate enough, they'll come up with these solutions.
Yeah, let me pile on to that, because I think there is something very careful or nuanced about what Leyland said, and that's stop asking customers stupid questions. They don't know what they want. They don't say what they feel. They don't know how to say. They don't do what they say. And I'm blown away at how many clients that I talk to that show me really bad research. At the same time, understanding what consumers are thinking, feeling, and doing, and using that to triangulate or infer unmet needs based on what they're doing is a smart thing to do, because the consumers are what generate income for your business. And there are some notable examples. I always am reminded that consumers said they would never use an ATM machine. Consumers hated the first season of Seinfeld. The famous Henry Ford quote about consumers wanted a faster horse instead of the automobile. So I think don't misinterpret what Leyland is saying is stop talking to customers. I think we should be talking to customers more. I just think we have to stop asking stupid questions and stop expecting them to be our R&D department. The other thing that I would add to this is if you're really looking for innovation, start inward. I mean, the cold, hard reality is we've had it too good for too long, at least in first world countries like the US and Canada. as evidenced by the fact that there's 17 ranch dressings in the grocery store. There's 12 peanut butters. They're all the same. They're all made with peanuts, right? They're all in the same jar. They're all brown, and they're all within $1 of each other. We have to stop making stuff that people don't need. And I think we need to be a lot more critical of what our employers are doing. Steve Jobs' brilliance, listen, he was brilliant for a lot of reasons, but when he came back to Apple, he got rid of half of the stuff that Apple was making. When he talked to Phil Knight at Nike, he says, I love your brand. Just do me a favor. Stop making half the stuff that you guys are making. Because what you do really well, you do really well. And then you make a whole bunch of stuff that's mediocre. And so I think we've gotten lazy because we had a boom economy for well over a decade where we just thought, we can make it. And the plethora of riches made it easy to mask the fact that people didn't need most of what we were selling. So let's get focused on the things that are legitimately solving problems versus coming up with the 18th ranch dressing because this one has peppercorn in it and the other 17 didn't.
Yeah, love that. Delete. This is what these are good for. It helps with the delete process, and most people need to just delete that will also just spawn innovation because there's just less noise, right? That's my favorite thing to do is to just delete. It's the fastest way to growth is usually through deletion. I love that. It's really interesting. Here's another thing that, a lot of people don't think about in the power of marketing is if you're a really good marketer, just do the marketing and let people vote with their wallets. If there's no reason why today you can't sell something, before it's actually built. So sell it and take some sort of payment for it. And if people are buying it, then there's your thing to innovate on, right? So if you have some sort of hunch or whatever, you don't even have to necessarily spend a lot of money doing it, but this is where you can spend more money in marketing versus, the actual R&D of building something first. Like there's just no need to even build it.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Tony. And thanks to all the participants, panelists, or the attendees that offered some questions. Listen, I'll end it off with this. And the first is, the three of you gentlemen, I respect tremendously. I follow all your content, Chris and Matt and Leyland. Tony and I graduate, well, for one reason or another, you gave us a degree, which I'm not sure why that happened, but
we make mistakes. We make mistakes.
Yeah, that's right. And it's funny, right? Because the way we look at it, the way we look at marketing at Hook and Ladder is that it's really the role of marketing is it's really meant to just subtly and sequentially move folks from, that non-ideal before state to that ideal after state. They don't buy products or services, they buy this transformation of state. And I think what we found most interesting about this COVID time is just simply that the before states and the after states have changed, a lot of them, but a lot of them have stayed the same. Like, some people are trying to escape a status of, you take, I don't know, like a lawn fertilizer company, right? Like the before state is, I in terms of status, I have the worst lawn on the street. I'm bringing down the value of the whole neighborhood. Whereas after, I want to be that king status. But certain things have stayed the same as it relates to that transformation, and certain things have changed. Our responsibility is to understand, just be intimate with that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Be intimate with our customer segments and understand what is their ideal after state, and speak to that. So that's the way we see it, which I know you guys echo a lot. Again, just thank you so much. I know it's middle of the day, and it's truly an honor to have the three of you guys who I respect so much to be a part of this. Just for the attendees before we log off here is I'm going to have a recording. Basically, every question and answer over the course of the webinar, each section, I'm going to break them up into mini videos, so that you can pick and choose your favorites that you want to watch again. You don't have to watch the whole recording, but I'll send you all of those on Friday. And I'm obsessed with staying on time. We have a few minutes, so if anyone has any final words from the panel, we'll leave it at that.
Is this where they vote on which one of us gets kicked off the panel, and we're down to the two, and who's going to be the American Idol for next week?
Well, and Chris, I was actually auditioning for to be able to ask some questions at the gathering next year.
Is that what it is, the moderation audition? I think Tommy's giving you a run for your money here. So you just got upstaged.
That's right.
Thanks, Caleb. Thanks, Tony. It was nice to meet you, Chris and Leyland. It was
Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
Thanks,
you, everybody.
guys.
Great to meet you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good day.